Good afternoon, everyone. In January, I announced my priorities for 2016: education, equity, the economy, and preparedness. Today, as the legislative session comes to a close, I'm pleased to announce it's only March 3rd, I believe, and we've already made great gains to turn these priorities into realities. Together with the legislature, we raised the minimum wage, giving more workers across our state the resources to provide for their families and better their lives. The House and the Senate took action to provide local jurisdictions with more tools to address affordable housing needs facing their communities. I look forward to receiving those bills. We took action to increase transparency and accountability and strengthen excellence in state government. I expanded support for Oregon small businesses by increasing resources for the Office of Small Business Advocate and creating a small business advisory cabinet that reports directly to me. Their first meeting is next week. I secured money for recovery and resiliency efforts for both Umpqua Community College, Douglas County, and Harney County. I successfully fought for more resources to help our communities prepare and address increased drought and wildfires. Additionally, we approved additional resources so the Department of Environmental Quality can continue to address air toxics and address health-related concerns to air toxics. With all the positive actions during the legislative session, I am certainly disappointed that the gun safety legislation stalled. Although we approved additional resources for the Oregon State Police to conduct background checks, we must do more to address gun safety. So I will be working to develop legislation for 2017 session and explore what might be achieved using my executive powers. I thank my legislative colleagues for their tireless efforts and collaboration during this process, and appreciate the many stakeholders and everyday citizens who weighed in on the issues that matter to them. Onward, Oregon. I'm happy to answer your questions.
A group called the Eastside Portland Air Coalition wrote you a letter asking for you to call a special session to deal with the air quality situation in Portland. Do you think that's on the table at all?
Well, I have not seen the letter yet, but I will certainly give it due consideration. The legislature approved my request to put aside $2.5 million to fund the air quality program at Department of Environmental Quality.
Your first full session as governor, what lessons have you learned?
Oh, great question. I think it was very useful for me. This was truly my first legislative session, a short session. We worked hard to have our agenda prepared ahead of time. We continued to have what I would consider a narrow focus. I believe that all of my legislative priorities, with the exception of the minimum wage, passed with bipartisan support. So I think the work we did to keep the legislation focused and thoughtful and evidence-based was very useful for a short session like this.
Governor, did you ask Dick Peterson to resign?
No.
You didn't?
No.
You said he resigned because of health concerns.
I received a call from him on Sunday afternoon. He notified me that he was resigning because of health concerns.
Does he have to live in the affected area?
I don't actually know where Mr. Peterson lives.
Is there any chance of a special session for Initiative Petition 28?
I have been very clear that I believe the state needs additional revenue to support our K through 12 programs, early childhood education, making sure that we make college affordable and accessible for Oregon students, and continuing on the path of the Oregon Promise to make sure that Oregon students can attend community colleges. So I'm certainly open to revenue conversations that the legislature wants to have.
Would you potentially call him back to have those conversations between now and November?
At this point in time, no.
What type of gun legislation are you looking at for 2017?
I have two areas of concern. One, I want to make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of harmful folks, and I want to make sure that we have the tools to keep guns out of the hands of folks who have unstable health issues, mental health issues.
Any ideas, any specifics on that at all?
At this point, we're still exploring for 2017.
The deadline to file for the May primary is next week, and I don't believe you've filed yet. Are you thinking about it at least?
I will file before the deadline. My focus has been on the legislative session.
With the legislative priority of some of the transparency measures, do you think the proposals have gone far enough without seriously examining exemptions in our Public Records Act?
The answer to your question is no. I think there is continuing work that needs to be done. I was very pleased to see our legislation move forward that requires lobbyists to report new clients within 3 days, regardless of whether we're in a legislative session or not. I think the Attorney General's task force is still working on public records exemptions. I think that's a conversation that must continue, and I am hopeful they will be bringing recommendations for the 2017 legislative session.
As a former lawmaker yourself, what did you think when you were observing the stall tactics that were being employed, particularly in the Senate?
Well, I was the minority leader, the caucus leader for almost 10 years, and I know what a challenging job it is, so I'm not going to coach minority leaders from the back seat on that one. What I will say is this. At this point in time, over 70 bills have passed. All but one have some level of bipartisan support.
Governor, last session you proposed as Secretary of State a campaign finance reform bill, and something almost identical, I think, was proposed this session, but I don't think, unless I missed out, I didn't hear anything from your office on the bill this session. Have you moved away from calling for campaign finance reform, or what were your thoughts on that bill?
No, I continue to support campaign finance reform in Oregon. It is an issue I've worked on since coming to the Capitol. I think reasonable limits are appropriate in Oregon. I don't think one person or a couple of people's megaphone should drown out everyone else's megaphones.
So why don't we hear more from the bully pulpit during the session for that bill?
I think you have really clear hearing from, frankly, Republicans and Democrats on this issue. They clearly weren't interested in moving forward.
You didn't mention...
And Secretary of State Atkins, I believe they're still working on their task force. That work is continuing. I anticipate they'll be bringing recommendations before the 2017 legislative session.
Governor, you didn't mention the Wolf bill in your statements, and I understand your office had a part in drafting that bill and was working on that bill. Are you surprised by some of the blowback it's gotten, and do you intend to sign that legislation, and do you support it?
Actually, my office was not involved in the drafting of the bill, other than at the request of legislators. We are still in the process. I don't know whether that's gotten to my desk yet, but before I determine whether or not we sign that legislation, we will be reviewing the legislation very carefully.
We were just with Senator Ferrioli, and he said this was your concept that, you know, Richard Whitman was working on it, so you're saying this wasn't your own?
That is inaccurate.
Are there any bills that you are considering vetoing at this point?
I believe I have 5 days to notify the legislature whether we intend to veto any of the bills, and we will take that opportunity to review the legislation, and we will give the appropriate notice if appropriate.
Anything more? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.